I think now that we have a good idea of where you're at, and we have a good idea of, how you were clashing with the chain of command and what some of the issues that were kind of being brought up, so we can kind of speed forward into,
For sure.
the COVID narrative.
For sure. For sure. So the COVID narrative, my specific case, I mentioned pattern of misconduct and how some of the commands will throw the book at individuals and see what sticks to get them out. I was one of those individuals, and many of us were that I know personally in that specific command. In my specific case, if you were to look at some of the dates on the documents for some of the things they were throwing at me, all of it happens after I submitted for my religious exemption.
Right.
So, you know, from what it looks like to me, if you were to look at my case in specific, they gathered what they were going to need. They waited for me to do that, and then they threw the book at me.
Yeah.
So I was subsequently knocked down from sergeant for pattern of misconduct. They took my rank, bumped me down to corporal, put me on restriction. They didn't dock my pay, much to their credit, which I really needed at the time. But I was on restriction, which entailed me, as a former NCO and former platoon sergeant, to go to the battalion office and clean and spruce up everything, take out trash and that sort of thing. For all to see. That's part of the process when you get NJP'd. It's a normal part of the process. I don't bemoan that, but when you couple that with the retaliation I faced for COVID refusal, it gives anybody it's literally dragging your name in front of through the mud in front of God and everybody, which is exactly.
They wanted to humiliate you because
Right.
you stood up and just by submitting a religious accommodation.
Right.
And they
Which would
wanted
have
to
been
punish, was retaliation, and then that on top of it.
Some of the same stuff, like,
Gosh.
because I had said no, and I was a pretty big advocate of, hey, this stuff's, illegal and we shouldn't be doing this. And, you don't have to get it if you don't want to, like, just say no. And I was a platoon sergeant at the time. So, I worked all week, platoon sergeant. I went to JRTC in the middle of COVID, and it was like September, I believe, 21. So I went all the way, down there, did all that. I refused the vaccine before we left. I refused the vaccine while we were down there. I, performed my duties very well in JRTC, or sorry, it's the other one at Fort Irwin, not JRTC, NTC. Or
I've been
whatever.
up there. Yeah. In TC, that's right.
Yeah, so that's the one I was at. And then, came back, refused the vaccine again, and then, worked all week. And then on that Friday, the first sergeant's like, hey, Sergeant Major's pulling you from this position, report to S1 in the morning or S2 in the morning. All right. Or Monday morning, right? So nobody knew. So, I had to call my gunnery sergeant in at the time and be like, hey, man, we got to do a left seat, right seat. You got to take over the platoon on Monday. So let me give you everything you need. Here you go. Monday morning comes around. I'm up at the S2 and my whole platoon's standing in front of the gunnery sergeant. I'm gone. So, that's kind of the same concept. But this guy's here. He's gone. Now he's, over here doing nothing. Right. So,
right. And for context, like when they busted me down, I don't think I was selected for staff sergeant at the time or anything like that. So that's neither here nor there.
Right.
But we had just gotten back from a small short deployment for Arctic training in Norway. They were looking for volunteers to go on the med float that subsequently went to Kabul for the pullout. I raised my hand. I couldn't go because of the vaccine, but I was considered. And in lieu of that, they were fixing to send me out to, I was going to be a Marine Corps liaison, I don't think in 29 Palms. Actually, yeah, it was supposed to be, I think, for Camp Wilson. It was supposed to be a training liaison there that was going to, pretend to be, terrorists in makeshift huts to fight whoever's coming in for training.
Yeah, like the OP4 personnel.
Yeah, OP4.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
and they were going to send me on that. that was one of the things that they used in my board and my NJP was that I didn't show up to the airport, but I did. They just hadn't paid for the ticket
Wow.
yet. They didn't pay for the ticket. They told me to go home. I went home. I waited. They're like, "Where are you? What are you talking about? I went home like you told me to go home. They haven't paid for the ticket. Bullshit." Okay,
Wow.
you know.
You got in trouble for that
That
shit.
kind of thing. And that it sounds. I don't want it to sound like I'm sitting here complaining like some E3 or something.
Mm.
But um, when you're using stuff like that to condemn somebody, I mean that's not even valid. Like,
Well, you know what? That reminds me of Lance Castle. He had an appointment he was supposed to go to, but then I'm sorry, he signed out on leave. He went on leave, right? Through the chain of command, blah blah, right? His chain of command, I think it was his first sergeant or his commander, I don't remember which one, but they emailed him an appointment that he was supposed to go to. Well, he never checked his emails. He's on leave. So when he didn't go to that appointment, he got in trouble because he missed an appointment. He's like, I was on leave. You emailed it to me. Like, why wouldn't you call this dude and be like, hey, you need to go to this appointment, right? Like, but
yeah,
it's kind of the same concept, right?
slimy, underhanded tactics. It's
Yeah.
like if you had anything valid, then maybe it would stick. Obviously, it did. So I don't discredit that maybe a couple of the things they had were valid because of my performance slip at that time due to personal issues, and I own that. But when you're throwing a literal book at somebody and they throw out most of it in the board anyway, they wanted to get me out with an other than honorable,
Mm.
which would have precluded me from things like receiving VA or could have precluded me from things like the GI Bill and receiving VA benefits and any of the stuff that is vital to me right now.